Elizabeth Holmes, the founder and former CEO of the failing blood testing firm, Theranos, was found guilty on 4 out of 11 federal fraud and conspiracy charges, more than 3 years after she was initially accused. After a spectacular fall from grace, Holmes went from being regarded as the next Steve Jobs to being a Silicon Valley entrepreneur on trial for fraud. Holmes, a Stanford University dropout who was inspired by her own dread of needles, founded the company at the age of 19, with the goal of developing a less expensive and more efficient blood test. Patients will be able to screen for diseases like cancer and diabetes with just a few drops of blood, according to Theranos. She was able to secure hundreds of millions of dollars in capital, as well as a board of prominent politicians and significant retail partners. But a Wall Street Journal investigation poked holes into Theranos' testing and technology, and the dominoes fell from there. Holmes and her former business partner, Ramesh Balwani, were charged in 2018 by the US government with multiple counts of wire fraud. For today's video, let's take a look at the rise and fall of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. In March of 2004, Holmes was studying chemical engineering, drops out of school to pursue her startup, Theranos, which she founded in 2003 at age 19. The name is a combination of the words therapy and diagnosis. Later, she meets Ramesh Balwani, who also known as Sunny. He made the decision to join Theranos as Holmes' right-hand man. The two later revealed to be romantically involved. In September 2013, Holmes opens up about Theranos, announces Walgreens' partnership. A decade after first starting the company, Holmes takes the lid off Theranos, and courts media attention the same month that Theranos and Walgreens will form a long-term partnership. The first Theranos Wellness Center location opens in a Walgreens in Palo Alto, where consumers can access Theranos' blood test. The original plan had been to make Theranos testing available at Walgreens locations nationwide. Later, Holmes was named one of the richest women in America by Forbes, as she owns a 50% stake in the startup, pinning her personal wealth at $4.5 billion. And on December of 2014, Theranos has raised $400 million according to the company, and, among the investors that was involved is Oracle's founder, Larry Ellison. In July 2015, Theranos gets FDA approval for herpes test. The FDA clears Theranos to use its proprietary tiny blood collection vials to finger-stick blood tests for herpes simplex 1 virus, and its first and only approval for a diagnostic test. And on the October of the same year, Theranos became the subject of a Wall Street Journal investigation. The Wall Street Journal reports that Theranos is using its proprietary technique on only a small number of the 240 tests it performs, and that the vast majority of its tests are done with traditional vials of blood, drawn from the arm, not the few drops taken by a finger prick. A day later, Theranos halts the use of its blood collection vials for all but the herpes test due to pressures from the FDA, and later that month, the FDA released 2 heavily redacted reports citing 14 concerns, including calling the company's proprietary vial an uncleared medical device. 1 week after the journal report, Holmes is interviewed on stage at the outlet's conference in Laguna Beach. "We know what we're doing, and we're very proud of it," she says. Amid the criticism, Theranos reportedly shakes up its board of directors, eliminating Henry Kissinger and George Shultz as directors while moving them to a new board of counselors. The company also forms a separate medical board. And on November of 2015, Safeway, which invested $350 million into building out clinics in hundreds of its supermarkets to eventually offer Theranos blood tests, reportedly looks to dissolve its relationship with the company before it ever offered its services. In January of 2016, federal regulators take issue with Theranos' California lab, sends Theranos a letter saying its California lab has failed to comply with federal standards, and that patients are in immediate jeopardy. It gives the company 10 days to address the issues. In response, Walgreens says it will not send any lab tests to Theranos' California lab for analysis, and suspends Theranos' services at its Palo Alto Walgreens location. And on March of 2016, CMS threatens to ban Holmes and Balwani from the laboratory business for 2 years, after the company allegedly failed to fix problems at its California lab. And later on May, Balwani steps down. The company also adds 3 new board members as part of the restructuring. Fabrizio Bonanni, a former executive vice president of biotech firm Amgen, former CDC director William Foge, and former Wells Fargo CEO Richard Kovacevic. Theranos voids 2 years of blood test results from its proprietary testing devices, correcting tens of thousands of blood test reports. And finally, CMS revokes Theranos' license to operate its California lab, and bans Holmes from running a blood testing lab for 2 years. Holmes tries to move past recent setbacks by unveiling a mini-testing laboratory, called Minilab, at a conference for the American Association for Clinical Chemistry. In selling the device, versus operating its own clinics, Theranos seeks to effectively sidestep CMS sanctions, which don't prohibit research and development. Theranos' big investor, Partner Fund Management, sues the company for $96.1 million, the amount it sunk into the company in February 2014, plus damages. It accuses the company of securities fraud. Theranos and Partner Fund Management settled in May 2017 for an undisclosed amount. The company also lays off 340 employees as it closes clinical labs and wellness centers as it attempts to pivot and focus on the Minilab. In November 2016, Walgreens sued the blood testing startup for breach of contract. Walgreens sought to recover the $140 million it poured into the company. The lawsuit was settled August 2017. This caused Theranos to downsize its workforce, laying off approximately 155 employees, or about 41% of staffers. And on April of 2017, Theranos lab at Arizona settles with the CMS, agreeing to pay $30,000 and not to own or operate any clinical labs for 2 years. Then, Theranos also settles with the Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich over allegations that its advertisements misrepresented the method, accuracy, and reliability of its blood testing, and that the company was out of compliance with federal regulations governing clinical lab testing. Theranos then agrees to pay $4.65 million back to its Arizona customers as part of a settlement deal. And on March of 2018, the SEC charges Holmes and Balwani with a massive fraud involving more than $700 million from investors through an elaborate, years-long fraud in which they exaggerated or made false statements about the company's technology, business, and financial performance. The SEC alleges Holmes and Balwani knew that Theranos' proprietary analyzer could perform only 12 of the 200 tests it published on its patient testing menu. Theranos and Holmes agree to resolve the claims against them, and Holmes gives up control of the company and much of her stake in it. Balwani, however, is fighting the charges, with his attorney saying he accurately represented Theranos to investors to the best of his ability. Holmes and Balwani are indicted on federal wire fraud charges over allegedly engaging in a multi-million-dollar scheme to defraud investors, as well as a scheme to defraud doctors and patients. Minutes before the charges were made public, Theranos announced that Holmes will step down as CEO. The company's general counsel, David Taylor, takes over as CEO. Both Elizabeth Holmes and Ramesh Balwani were appearing in federal court for a status hearing, both facing charges of conspiracy and wire fraud for defrauding investors with the Theranos blood testing lab services. In September 2020, a new court document reveals Holmes may seek a mental disease defense in her criminal fraud trial. Later, in August 2021, unsealed court documents reveal Holmes is likely to claim she was the victim of a decade-long abusive relationship with Balwani. The allegations led to the severing of their trials. His trial is slated to begin in 2022. Initially set to begin in July 2020, Holmes' criminal trial is further delayed till July 2021 due to the coronavirus pandemic. News surfaces that Holmes is expecting her first child, once more further delaying her criminal trial. She gave birth in July. More than 80 potential jurors are brought into a San Jose courtroom for questioning over the course of 2 days to determine if they are fit to serve as impartial, fair jurors for the criminal trial of Holmes. A jury of 7 men and 5 women is selected, with 5 alternatives. After 3 months of testimony from 32 witnesses, the criminal fraud case of Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes makes its way to the jury of 8 men and 4 women who will decide her fate. The jury would go on to deliberate for more than 50 hours before returning to a verdict. And finally, on January of 2022, Holmes is found guilty of 1 count of conspiracy to defraud investors, as well as 3 wire fraud counts, tied to specific investors. She is found not guilty on 3 additional charges, concerning defrauding patients. The jury returns no verdict on 3 of the charges concerning defrauding investors. Holmes faces up to 20 years in prison as well as a fine of $250,000 plus restitution for each count. With this, hopefully you guys able to understand the Theranos scandal in detail. If you enjoyed the video, then feel free to hit the like and subscribe button to help the channel out. With that, Business Wisdom, signing out.